Do you think that Christian persecution is on the rise?
Oh, I know it is. It's documented. 20th century was the worst century for Christian martyrs of of Christian history, all the previous centuries combined. There were more martyrs in the 20th century than any other time. We think about the early church, they were all being persecuted.
Yeah.
Far greater in the 20th century. Now, around the world, we are by far the most persecuted religion. Absolutely. And it's a crime. It's an outrage. And we talk about, in a kind of demure way, about religious liberty in our country, which is indeed under threat. But you want the real threat to religious liberty, it's in different parts of the world. People are being killed for their Christian faith.
So why is that fact suppressed? That is intentionally suppressed? Again, I was like 45 before I realized the Bolshevik Revolution was aimed at Christians. I don't know why I didn't get that, but I didn't.
Yeah, I have to ask the keepers of the flame culturally, but it's simply the case today. I mean, it's the most persecuted religion. We can look at things from different angles, I suppose. One tragedy, let's say in the 20th century, if you have World War I and World War II, yes, there are anti-Christian elements, to be sure. I mean, Hitler is deeply anti-Christian. But you also had French Christians killing German Christians, killing Canadian Christians, killing American Christians, killing Russian Christians. It said it was this massive Christian slaughter bench. And my pet theory is when you go to Europe today, especially parts of Europe, and you see a kind of spiritual wasteland, I think that's a big part of it.
I agree completely.
We're just recovering from this horrific outbreak of Christian on Christian violence. The gospel, did that get into anybody's mind and heart in the 20th century that allowed this orgy of violence to take place?
What do you think that was? Why the 20th century?
Well, you could do
so much darker than anything that happened in the Dark Ages.
You could do the Leo the 13th, who gave us the St. Michael prayer and who supposedly had a intuition or a sense that the 20th century would belong to the devil. And to my mind, it's kind of hard to argue with that. If you believe in the devil, as I do, and you see what happened in the 20th century, it's kind of hard to imagine it wasn't to some degree.
Well, nuclear weapons are proof, as far as I can tell.
I know. I mean, the mass destruction, mass death of the 20th century. It's hard to blame that simply on political realities.
Totally. Wait, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. I'm so sorry. You said Pope Leo the 13th?
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean? He had this sense?
He had a mystical experience of the devil would have a unique control over the 20th century. And so he formulates the famous St. Michael prayer that we still pray in many churches, asking for the protection of Michael the Archangel.
When did he have this experience?
Toward the end of his life. So he died 1903. So it would have been like around 1900, so late 19th century. And many would say, well, it was borne out by the 20th century.
I would.
For me, in my own lifetime, when I was a young guy going through school, we were still very much formed by a more liberal Catholic view. The devil, literary device, as a symbol, for evil. Don't take it literally. It's not
you were
real.
Taught that?
Yeah. It was sort of the standard view. But you know what really convinced me powerfully of the devil's reality was the sex abuse scandal. Because you look at the sex abuse scandal, which has haunted almost the whole of my priesthood. It broke in Chicago in the early 90s. I was ordained in 1986. So most of my priesthood has been under the shadow. The clergy sex abuse scandal has adversely affected the church in every possible way. And when you look at it and you say, could that have just been an accident or just human folly and sin? It seemed to have been so designed by a wicked mind that wanted to undermine the church. But then, now look at the whole 20th century and the level of destruction and degradation. It's hard for me to imagine it's just because of political forces or cultural
agree more.
forces.
I've come to this conclusion recently, but I think you're exactly right. So what's the St. Michael's prayer that was...
St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. I won't get it exactly right, but it's an invocation of St. Michael to defend us in battle against the devil who sends his minions for the destruction of souls. So it's a very conscious awareness of the presence of evil in the world. And
Pope Leo said, the 13th said, I think this century is going to be
would belong to the devil. And he formulated that prayer to be prayed in Catholic churches.
What do people say when he said that?
I think most of them followed him. I think most said we start saying that.
Because, 1903 was a period of great hope in the West.
Yes. which is fascinating to me. And there's a magazine called The Christian Century. It's a Christian theological journal, and it was born at that time. And that was the idea. This is the Christian century.
Yes.
That, progress and economic progress and
Dominating
political,
the world.
and the social gospel, and this is our century. And then it didn't exactly work out that way. Leo intuited or had a mystical experience to the effect that it would belong not to the Christian churches, but to the devil.
A lot of the news you read doesn't really have a lot of inherent meaning, but this does. Starting May 19th, the Hallow app is leading a consecration to Jesus through St. Joseph. You might be asking, why St. Joseph? Why now? Well, consider this. Joseph was the man God himself trusted with his own son. He wasn't a king or a warrior. He was a carpenter. He was a quiet and steady man of unshakable faith. In an age that mocks humility, can you imagine the basis of wisdom and a relationship with God? It's time we looked to someone who embodied humility, not for applause, but for God. This series is not just about St. Joseph. It's about what happens when you follow his example, when you trade noise for silence, when you stop chasing relevance and start seeking holiness. And all of that begins with humility, which is really just perspective. You are not God. It's important to remind yourself of that. We do every day. So every week on Hallow, you'll hear reflections grounded in the Gospels, pray powerful prayers like the Litany of St. Joseph, and hear glory stories from throughout church history, not myths, not legends, actual intersections and power from a saint who's been quietly helping people for thousands of years. Hallow is the world's #1 prayer app, and experiences like this are why my family and I cannot get enough of it. It is a constant dinner table conversation. So get 3 months right now at hallow.com/Tucker for free. You'll be glad you did. hallow.com/Tucker.
So, we got a battle on our hands, but we mustn't forget what we were saying earlier. Where sin abounds, grace abounds the more. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. That image too, I don't know why, but for most of my life, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, which means somehow hell is going to come against us, but we're going to win the battle. But that's not what it means. The gates would be the weakest point of a city wall. And so when you're attacking a city, you go after the gates. So what the Lord is saying is, no, you're not defensive here. You're on the march. You're on the offensive, and the gates of hell will not prevail against you. You're going to win. You're invading hell, and it's not going to prevail against you. So it's like not a cowering, like, oh, we'll put up a good defense, and I guess we're going to...
or move as far away from hell as we can.
We are on the march.
Move to the suburbs.
No, but see, one of the problems is when Christians forget that and they hand the world over to pure secularism or whatever, well, of course we're not going to do well in the battle. But when Christians know, our job is to be fully engaged in this great struggle. And we're going after you, hell. We're coming after hatred, violence, stupidity, superstition, scapegoating. We're going after you. We're on the march. When I was coming of age, we didn't have that language.
Why?
It was an attempt. I know because the people that taught me were good people, and they were positively motivated. I know that for sure. They felt the church needed to be relevant to the modern world, and that the modern world should set the agenda for the church. That was a big part of the mentality. That we had been in a fortress too long. We've been in a defensive crouch. We had demonized the world, and so now we need to go out to the world in a confident spirit. And that's definitely the Catholicism I got as a young man. But see, here's something I've always found kind of puzzling. So I come of age right after the Second Vatican Council, which ended 1965. I went to first grade in 1966, right? So that's the church that I inherited very much. Vatican II was written by people who had experienced the worst of the 20th century.
Yes.
Mostly European intellectuals, French, German, a lot of them. Americans too,
Swiss.
some Italians, Swiss, right, are the people that wrote Vatican II. And they experienced some of the worst horrors in human history.
So Vatican II is a direct response to the Second World War.
No, I wouldn't say that. Vatican II, look, let me talk about it positively. Vatican II was a missionary council. I think the best people at Vatican II felt the church has been crouching behind walls for too long, and it should go out not to conform to the modern world, but to go out to convert the modern world. It's how do we get the church to engage modernity in a confident, spirit. I think that people like de Lubac and von Balthasar and Wojtyła and Ratzinger, these people, that's what they had in mind, Now, what the church became after the council, that's a different story. What developed after the council, that's the church that I came of age in. And I think that was a too apologetic church. That was a church that, in fact, lost a missionary edge. It was more the, conformity to the world. The world sets the agenda for us. That was a distortion of Vatican II. But that's the church that formed a lot of people in my generation.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.